Good morning. My name is Jim Perotti. We're here at the Veterans Memorial Center with Chris Hawkins, and we're doing the interview. Joe Davey is here and Bill Ellis. And Chris, welcome to the center.
Thank you.
You
My
can
name is
begin.
Christopher Hawkins. I was born in Welwyn Garden City, Hertfordshire, England, to English parents. Both my military background with my family. Both of my grandfathers were World War One British Army. My father's father was highly decorated with a Distinguished Service Medal, and my mum was in the RAF, WAF in World War Two. My father was in the Royal Navy. We emigrated here in 1967 to Connecticut. America won between three choices: Australia, South Africa, and America. My father was offered jobs. My father built rockets for the Brits, for de Havillands and Hawker Siddeley, and he also worked on airliners. He started working as a shop rat during the war, sweeping up the floors of sawdust from the mosquitoes that were made, the wooden aeroplanes. So I moved here in '67, and we settled in Plainville, Connecticut, and it was an eye-opening experience to move to America. And my American ideas of America were formed by television, because we had plenty of American television. So my idea of America was Batman lived in New York, Perry Mason and the Beverly Hillbillies lived in California, Indianapolis had the Indy 500 because an Englishman won it, and the rest of it was Bonanza, and the Cartwrights lived there. So high school, Plainville, was kind of an industrial town, farm town. It's right next to Hartford and New Britain, and the other part, which is part of my life, is auto racing. We moved right behind a stock car track, and I've been to 122 of them now. So when I got towards my senior year, I graduated when I was 17. I enlisted in the United States Air Force during my senior year, so I knew what my path would be. I didn't want to stay in Plainville. I really wasn't college material, and the choices back then where you went to work in a factory, which my dad would tell me was no place to work, and eventually they would go out of business because they would get driven out of business, and he hit the nail on the head. So I went to 20 August 1975, I went into the U.S. Air Force, and so that was 50 years ago. And so 50 years ago today, I was looking forward to graduating basic. And basic, I really don't remember very much of it. I think most people are like that. Probably the most two things that stood out to me the most was somebody tried to shoot President Ford twice while I was in basic training, and as I sat there, and it was
Where did you do your basic
at
training?
Lackland Air Force
Lackland
Base.
Air Force.
All the Air Force Basic was Lackland. So Lackland in August was hot, but back then I weighed 117 pounds. So I was from there. I went to Lowry Air Force Base in Denver to learn my Air Force specialty code, which was 67450, which meant you worked in the warehouse. We were boxologists, and while I was there, I had orders to go to Guam, and I got called in right before I was going home on my leave, and was told they were redlined, and I was going to Minot, and I looked at the personnel sergeant in my best little English accent and said, "What country is that in, Sergeant?" And he started laughing at me, and I was off to North Dakota, where I spent 2 years, and in the Strategic Air Command. 91st Strategic Missile Wing, working in a warehouse as a junior enlisted, and Minot was very busy. We were on alert a lot, and it was cold. I got there in winter, and I was, still really young, and life got very real. The second night I was there, and I was awoken, and the sky was daylight, and I looked towards the flight line, and it was in flames. A B-52 had exploded. The wing blew off. There was refueling it, and there was a spark somewhere, and it blew the wing off, and it landed on the POL guy's truck and killed them. The ops guy who was in the in the cockpit, got out, broke his leg, and some others were highly decorated for pulling up ukes, which tow airplanes to pull the other planes out of the way. And they named my barracks after the two guys. I never got to meet them. Their name was Vienna and Panther, and they died at that incident. And it was very real. The rest of my 2 years in Minot, I lived off base a lot for a while, and then I came back. But it was fun. The air show was fantastic. Minimum interval takeoffs, you know, and the Spittin' Kittens of the 5th Fighter Interceptor Group and their beautiful F-106s, which are the best-looking American fighter ever made, in my opinion. Put on a great show, and it went really quickly. And during that time, my mother got really, really ill, and we have no family in America other than me and my mom and dad. And my mom received one of the first pacemakers ever installed in a human being at Mass General, and I was granted a hardship discharge to go home and help my dad take care of her. And there's really not much else to say about mine other than it. You know, it was 2 years of junior enlisted work in a warehouse at an Air Force base, being cold and doing what junior enlisted do, drink and chase the local girls, and it was a good experience.
Excellent.
So, Mom's eventually got better, and I went to school. I was out for 5 years. I got a degree in graphic design. I love art and photography. I'm a published photographer in the auto racing industry. I've attended 122 tracks. That's what I do for fun. And something nagged me that I never finished my term of enlistment. And I ran into a guy who was a recruiter for the National Guard, and he said, and, you know, I said, I'm a 4F. I was given a hardship discharge for and he goes, can you get a thing from that the hardship is gone? And I said, yes, it is. And they granted me a waiver, and I went back in as a traditional guardsman. You may hear the term M-Day sometime applied to National Guard, and that stands for Mute-a-Day. And National Guard gets 2 days pay for 1 day's work on their weekend drills. So they're called, there's a morning and afternoon, so there are multiple unit training assemblies, hence they're M-Day soldiers. So, and I did that for 4 years at Company B, 1st Battalion, 102nd Infantry, Meriden, Connecticut, and that's where I learned to be an infantryman. I was trained by the guys in the unit, and most of them were Vietnam veterans and combat veterans, and I did the SOJT route, and they made an infantryman out of me, and my respect for those guys is immense.
Where did you train for that? Did you go anywhere special?
No,
or was
most of
within
it
the
was,
unit?
yeah, well, yeah, during that was, I was going to get, in those early years, I went to, my first field training exercise was at Camp Edwards in Massachusetts, which is now the Massachusetts Military Reservation, which is next to where Otis Air Force Base is. Then we did, you know, we did our weekend things, and then we did Fort Drum, and I thought Minot was cold, and it was, you know, they're 2 week things, but it was very intense training with old equipment. We weren't well funded, and it was still the old guard. There was, it was, the way it was the way it was run was the full-time force were technicians. They're GS workers, and they're unionized. So when they worked during the week, they wore the uniform, but they're really GS workers. And that's how the Guard was run. There was a full-time force, and that changed. And the old Guard, which was, I'm trying to think of the right word. It's, I can't come up with the word. But anyway, there's a lot of family roots that run through it. So it was the old school.
Understand.
And I think intentionally that DOD and the Army looked to modernize the Guard because it was neglected by the regular Army for a long time, and they knew they were going to need it. And as we went back to that, I didn't see it when I look back to it now, that how they modernized the Guard and made it a modern fighting force, and I'm proud to have been a part of it, and that's what I'll explain next. The part-time things during that, yeah, I went to a 2-week leadership school, so I got promoted to sergeant, and then during that time, some of the full-timers now were called Active Guard Reserve. There's Title 10 deals, Title 10 of the United States Code deals with active duty military. Title 32 deals with the National Guard. They're two different punts of money, that's all. But you can be active duty on Title 32. Yeah. And they came up with the Active Guard Reserve, and I think part of it may have been to take the technician and the Union side out of the combat arms units, especially. I may be wrong, but that's what I observed.
Well,
and
the word you were looking for was the old guard.
What?
The old guard, the one that guards the cemetery now. Is that
the
word you were looking for?
No.
Different.
But so as the people I worked for in the Guard, who were full-time now, were Active Guard Reserves, so they were on active duty. So you did your active duty schools, and it brought more of an active component into the Guard, I think, the way it worked. So we were all AGR, and they kept growing the force. I was in the second iteration. So at that point, I was working for the Hartford Insurance Group. I had a strange job where I worked 39 hours a week, 13 hours a night, 3 straight nights, and then you had 4 days off. And it was getting old, and I was engaged. I got married, and they said, they're hiring more AGRs. Would you consider it? And I didn't want to stay in corporate. I was sick of corporate already. And so I put in the AGR tours of 3 years, your initial tour, and I took one as the unit clerk of Headquarters Company, 1st Battalion, 102nd Infantry. And that was in 1986. So the units then were plussed up. The old Guard units might have 1 full-timer working for it. Trying to run a whole Army unit of that, a regular Army unit would have 4, 5, 6 people running it. So the actual the day-to-day operations of the unit, your administration, your supply, your training, and all that stuff. So we had 4 in each unit, and so a month after I got married, I went back on AGR, and then we did the unit clerk thing, but we were getting ready to be reorganized from a heavy to a lighter configuration for the unit. What's called the MTO, a Modified Table of Organization and Equipment, which is your,
TL. Yep.
Yeah, it's your manning document and your equipment and how your unit's put together. And we consolidated the unit clerks into a personal administration center at the battalion level. And out of all of them, I was the one who became the PAC supervisor. So in '87, instead of the brigade, so here's our hierarchy back then, was the battalion fell under the 43rd Infantry Brigade out of Connecticut, which was the old 43rd Division from World War II, and that fell under the 26th Division, which was the 26th Yankee Division. And there, if you know how the Army divisions are numbered as active Army, then the Guard divisions, and then the Army Reserve divisions as you go up. And they had an operation, and let me go back to where we were in '87. The brigade went to Camp Grayling in Michigan for their annual training. We didn't. The 102nd, and then from the 242nd Engineers from Connecticut, and another Guard units, and I don't know if there were any Army Reserve units in it. I would imagine there were involved in a thing in November of '87 called Operation Golden Thrust. And Operation Golden Thrust was the largest peacetime mobilization exercise since World War II. Since the beginning, before World War II, when they called up the Guard. And when I look back at it now, it was put together because they knew that sooner or later they were going to mobilize us, and to get cobwebs out and to see where we were at to do it, kind of deal. So it was 2 weeks at Camp Edwards, and it was in the snow. They did their FTX. They gave them all flu shots, and they went out, and the snow was going sideways. And it was really quite interesting. But as I look back on that, and I realized where they were heading with it. So from there it went on. I was at the battalion until 1994, but also in 1987 I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, to take the Primary Leadership Development course again, which was 4 weeks in January, and it snowed like crazy in Fort Dix. And then, for a course that the Army said I didn't have to take, I was already qualified, but they pulled us all through it again, and there was a lot of AGRs and a lot of active duty recruiters, and they brought in, and the Guard and even the Army was tightening up their non-commissioned officer education system. And I think now, looking at it, the Army has a fantastic NCOES. They really, really do. They turn their NCOs into professionals, and it does weed out. I saw people fail and drop out, and I didn't realize that the system was working. It was getting those who might have been conditionally promoted and this and that, and when they got to the field, and I'll get to that a little later when I talk about Fort Jackson and Fort Ben Harrison, my active duty schools, got to come back to where that was. In 87. Okay.
You were training up in Michigan.
Yeah, they were in Michigan and we were there.
And you were...
But also in 87. So I went to PLDC, and then, being as now I was a clerk, I was not MOS qualified. And being as they'd hired all these unit clerks, the Army Reserve and the Guard put together a 3-week can you type be a personnel thing at the Georgia Military Institute in Macon, Georgia. And I spent 3 weeks there, and with people from all over the Guard, and and it was a hoot. And the school, the Georgia Military Institute, was actually an old blind school. It was an experience. And at that time when I was there, from there, the National Guard, with all the full timers that they hired, made their own education system, because there are specific things that are specific to National Guard, like knowing how to pay them for their annual training. It's all separate. Their weekend drills, the training schedules, the schooling, and all that is a separate function. You learn the institutional knowledge you get is from working it, and we found that out later when we started mobilizing units. So they have a schoolhouse in North Little Rock, Arkansas. It's called the National Guard Professional Education Center. It's on Camp Robinson. It's a beautiful facility. And that's when I went to the unit clerk course. And while I was there, this is before phones, they came in and says, they want you to call your state. I'm like, all right. I would check in every few days anyway. And they're going, call this guy up. His name is Al Hall. I'm like, okay, he's a company commander of an infantry unit in Batesville, Arkansas. And they're going to Wales next year, and you're going with them. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're going, Company A of my battalion is going to England to do their summer camp in 1988. And we would conversely bring a British Territorial Army unit over here to train. And they were a hoot to train with. And so they sent a thing. They wanted an observer from Connecticut who knew what was going on. They wanted at least an O3. Well, they sent me as an E5. And the reason being was my commander, now the late Brigadier General Brian Phipps, said, you can understand what they're saying. So I went to Arkansas in 87 again, and we flew on a C-141 out to Wales, trained with the Brits and the SAS, and up and down the Brecon Beacons, and infantry competition called the Vulse Mushroom. The Arkansas guys absolutely hated it. And then they looked at me and wondered what my YD patch was, a 26's YD, and I'm going, it's not Yay Dixie, buddy. And he's going, and he goes, we don't like Yankees. It was fun. And we took the Connecticut unit the next year, and to Salisbury Plain, and which was nice because the Arkansas guys, they went to London for 3 days. I went and stayed at my aunt's in Brighton. I wasn't going to go show them around London,
right,
which is my hometown.
How was training with the SAS fellows?
Yeah.
Are they hard chargers?
They're as hard as any soldier you'll ever meet anywhere in the world. But on the second trip, I did get to run into somebody who might be a little tough at the Gurkhas. And we watched the Gurkhas train, and this was a NATO exercise operation. They called it, the other one we did in England, it was a NATO exercise, Operation Roaring Lion, which my boys from the ghettos of New Haven called Operation Snoring Lion, as they were waiting to be attacked. So, but that was one of those things that you get to do in the Guard that you probably wouldn't get to do in active duty, was those sort of opportunities. And it was during that time, though, in 1989, my life changed dramatically before I went on that. And as my wife started getting ill, and then in March of 1989, she was diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia and a 2-year term of chemotherapy. She nearly died while I was in England, actually. And that continues through my thing. She went into remission, and we'll just keep that till a little bit later. After that, in 1991, it was the typical Guard thing, except we had Desert Storm, and in Connecticut, we didn't send any combat troops. We sent medics, we did send MPs, and we sent the Aviation Classification Preparer Activity Depot. But, so the only thing, I didn't really have much to do with Desert Storm other than they gave us the class on casualty notification officers and this and that in case we got called to do that. But the medics who were in our big old armory in New Haven had casualties, and it was really sad. Working in New Haven, Connecticut, in the armory, and Gough Street was in Crack Alley, right down the street from Yale. When I first started in 1986, we had a federal IG coming up, and I went in on a Saturday to work and heard pop, 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 and there was a kid dead in the sidewalk outside my window. My window was up here, so he was down there. I called the cops. One of our part-time soldiers named Roseborough said, "Hawk, we already got the kid." They got him right then. And then on a Tuesday night, down in the basement of the Army, you had to drive out onto Crack Alley. That's where the stables were. That became the parking lot. And I looked and I said, "This is trouble here." I could see trouble. By the time I got home, it was on the news. And the kid's name was, I won't say it, was spray painted all over the garage door. And I know it was a scary place to work. It really was, every day. And well, I'll cover this very quickly. We were told by our superiors we could not bring our own personal weapons to work, and we basically said to them, "Why don't you issue them to us?" And we ignored that order. When I drove into New Haven, I was armed. And if I broke regulations or what, I'll admit it. But it was...
Better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6.
You got that right. So anyway, back to 1991, and then we got into a thing called Quicksilver. I don't know if you've heard of Quicksilver. It was the Base Realignment and Closure Committee. Well, that's what it was called, was Quicksilver. And we got our forces cut in reserves, and then the active duty units that got cut, the Guard picked up a much larger combat role. In Connecticut, we lost 2 infantry battalions, and they were rolled into ours, being as we were the oldest and had the most history. And the other lineage went on to the leadership academies and stuff. So we keep our lineage and our honors straight. And there was a lot of heartburn. We had a lot of excess people, and then we were getting people off of active duty. And it was also the time of the transformation of the Guard into the modern era. We started getting all new equipment. Everything was new. And we knew then that they're going to use us now. They're not spending all this money on us not to deploy us. So, and obviously we did. But that's when when I look back, and even then we knew it was saying, get ready. It's going to be, it's a new world. And so through those, through the 90s, I'm running the battalion. And basically when you're full-time AGR, Battalion Personnel Service NCO, you're the face of the battalion. You're the guy whose office answers the phone. You got an administrative officer here, and your commanders are nearly always part-time officers. Some of them were state police. I had all kinds of lawyers, some really interesting people, you know. A lot of them were, when I started, were Vietnam vets, my leaders. And 94, we went to, this is a funny story, but we were at Fort Dix for our 2 weeks. And the Friday after, I'm ready to go on leave, and my boss goes, "You got to go up to the brigade and see the administrative officer." And I went in, and his name was Major Simon. I'm like, "How are you, sir?" And we got along, and he's going, "You want to work here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll come work up here. It's closer to home." And he's going, "I just fired my other guy, I won't mention his name, but while we were at Fort Dix, he had the job as the brigade PSNCL, and he wanted it his way. And someone had hung a uniform and boots in his closet, and he got sick of it, but he threw the boots and stuff into the dumpster. Well, they were his bosses, and when he came in for his clean, dry uniform, so he looks at me, he's going, "Well, you can work here because I just fired so-and-so. He threw my boots in a dumpster," and it was pretty funny. So I was now at the MACOM level, and at the brigade, and at that time, it was while I had a couple of years with the infantry brigade, which was fun because now I had all the battalions in the state, and I was a hands-on worker when I worked. I didn't sit in my office and expect stuff. I was taught that you get what you inspect, not what you expect. And I was out there, and I was on my subordinate units, and they had I kind of like one girl who told me, she's a retired sergeant major now and had my job at state level for a while. And she's going, "When I first come, the guys ribbed me so bad that you were so mean and this and that." And then she goes, "You came and showed me how to do my job and helped me." And I said, "Well, I show you the first time, and then the second time I get angry when it ain't done right or if it's late." And that's how I did my stuff. But my stuff was done on time. I said, because you're taking care of soldiers. When you're in personnel, it's not training, it's not the mission. Your mission is one thing: the soldier you're serving. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's how I ran my business. So in that time, my wife got better. She got a job, and then we're at Belmont Park for the Jockey Club Cold Cup. Mike Smith has just won it on a horse named Miner's Mark, and I got a $50 bill on it, and we're smiling, and I look at her face, and there's yellow in her skin, and I knew she had leukemia again, and I knew she was going for a bone marrow aspiration, and I never told her. We had just closed in our house, and she had leukemia again. And it's tough. And anyway, the brigade was going away. So they said, we're going to go to so now I had 2 brigade headquarters because we were going to be a field artillery brigade. This is Guard Bureau and Force Com figuring out what we're going to do. And they were going to give us paladins. There's nowhere to shoot a paladin in New England. And there is places, Fort Drummond, you need special dispensation from state highway commissions to drive them over the bridges. They're so heavy. And but the field artillery guys, because we had field artillery, we don't anymore. We had 155s and 105s. They were delighted. But I had 2 sets of books, so I promoted a lot of people and took care of things. And then the infantry went a day. It was very sad. We folded the colors of the 43rd Infantry Brigade, and at the same time, common sense set in, and we had another battalion in the Guard called, it was a 238 Service and Support Battalion, which was being deactivated. So they were all logistical MOSs. And Virginia had an area support group that they couldn't really stand up the way they wanted to. So we traded the Field Artillery Brigade to Virginia for the area support group, which is a top rank heavy echelons above corps logistical unit. And it was a different world. And these 238th people coming into a unit, that was run by hard charging infantrymen, it was very much of a culture clash, but I loved working at the brigade. I worked at Brainerd Airport, which is in Hartford, and my office looked out on the airport. It was a great place to work. And I loved my full-time job. I really, really did. And I got to travel more. somewhere in there I missed 1991 though, when I went to my basic non-commissioned officer course, which got me promoted to E7 at Fort Ben Harrison, which was my, other than the Fort Dix experience, was my first encounter at school with active duty Army people. It was a mix of AJR and this. And the funny thing is, when you go to an active duty school or any school, you get weighed in. If you don't pass it, you're going home. And the next thing was your PT test. And we had, I don't know, you know, we were given, we didn't have organized PT except on weekends. We did it on our own thing. I would run 5 miles every third day. You know, it was just stress relief, and you shouldn't have to worry about passing your PT test. But when I went to take the test there, the guy who was scoring it was from Connecticut. His name was Richie Miller. He was there at his advanced course. What I found with the active duty component guys who were in the soldier support and thing out of the one shop, a lot of them had never been in a real field environment, and many of them got lost in the woods. And then if the land nav exercise you had to pass, there were 40 people in my class. 36 of them failed land nav. The only 4 who passed were all active guard, National Guardsmen, because we were used to being in the woods and we were very tactically proficient. Many of these active duty guys weren't, and I will visit that story again in 1996 at Fort Jackson. It was a wake-up call, and my respect for them went way down, in a way. These guys joined the Army and have done nothing to this point in their career but sit at a desk and have never been in the field. And the Army needs to change that. But maybe they did. Anyway, from there, 96 I went to Fort Jackson. Oh, in between that with my wife, it gets messed up. She ended up in 94, 95 getting a bone marrow transplant from her brother. And they basically give her 9 years to live, and it almost went to that day. And what bone marrow transplant does to you, instead of the body rejecting the organ, the bone marrow rejects you. And it attacked her lungs and her skin, and she had a really, really hard time. And I was away. I was TDY a lot. We went all over the place. Canada, we gave aviation support, Gagetown, training with the Canadians, and they wined and dined us in Montreal. It was wonderful. There was some good things. The Brits wined and dined us. I mean, it wasn't all bad. So at that time, we got the ASD stood up. They were doing good. My last field training exercise with them was in 2000 at Fort Drum, and it was a train up for them with the, I think it's the 27th Enhanced Infantry Brigade, New York Guard out of Syracuse, very strack unit. And for their following year, which would have been a Joint Readiness Training Center rotation through Fort Polk, Louisiana, which is as realistic as you're going to get. There's that National Training Center, which is Fort Irwin, California, and we functioned out there. We did 4 rotations pushing active Army units through the tank training. That's another thing that I did. There's so many of them, I can't cover them all. Like, if you saw the list of states that I've been to working, and at that point, by around 2000, the state came calling. And it's kind of like your natural progression, so I ended up at state headquarters running the promotion, the enlisted promotion system, because the Guard promotion system in the old day was you got in a slot, you went to a promotion board, you got promoted. It was the good old boy system. It worked and it didn't. Then they went to more of an active duty thing, and I helped write the National Guard Regulation 600-200, which is personnel. There's an AR 600-200, and we rewrote the promotion system for the Army National Guard enlisted system, and based on points and evaluations and paper boards. Some of it works, some of it don't. Some work better for some states and some don't, but that's the way it is. And in the long run, it was better, but it's much harder for bigger states to run, I think, than a small state. And so 2000, I was a state. 96 was just Fort Jackson. It was 3-month school. I picked my dates January, February, March. 12 weeks active duty. It was a gentleman's course. It was a lot of fun, except for the field training exercise where I ran into another kid who was from the United States Army Reserve Control Group. He worked St. Louis, for the record, said he'd worked there his whole career, and we're in the woods in the pouring rain with his little map, and he's spinning it around, and he's going, we go that way, straight into the woods. And I'm like, at this point, we're just looking at him. I grabbed it out of his hands, and I said, do your declination. And he goes, what? Your magnetic declination? And the observer, they're called small group leaders, looking at us. And I said, and I didn't explain it. I said, if the declination shows here that we stay on this fire break, I'd already cased where we were training before I went out there, so I knew what to expect. And you just count the fire breaks in the woods. And I say, on the other side of that hill is probably the 71 Lima Enoch, and they're waiting to attack us and then go get a nice warm cup of coffee. And now the group leader's kind of chuckling, and she goes, Sergeant Diaz, we'll talk. She goes, Sergeant Hawkins, you won't need a leadership evaluation. You just passed it. And she goes, right. She goes, we're not going to walk you guys through those woods and get injuries. So most of these guys are never going to see the woods again, you know. So, but it was that thing was, and then at the Enoch was how many of the active duty people never get out to the field. And you think about it that they are, but it's an office army in a way.
Amazing.
But anyway, we'll speed along here. 2000, I got to Hartford. The first sergeant was AGR, was the enlisted personnel manager. His name's Dean. He lives in Melbourne. And this is 2000. And he took, because he hit 15 years active duty, they were looking to cut the full-time force. They initiated TERRA, the early retirement authority. Him and one of my old bosses took 15 years retirement. I fell into his slot, got promoted to first sergeant of the unit. We had a thing called OSACOM, which is Officer Support Airlift Command. We could pick up a phone. Each state has one. We're going to D.C. for the day, wherever we're going. And every month I would go down to National Guard Bureau to get my paperwork put on the top of the pile, kind of deal. That was the last time I did that. No, I did it after. It was the 10th of September, 2001. And we would usually land at Fort Belvoir, which is where the helicopter that hit the airliner came out of. That runway was being done, so we landed at Andrews that day. And when you get in, my boss was an 05, so they have a thing when you get there, if you're 05 above, you go in for a security briefing. So he comes in, and he comes out smiling, we got our rent-a-car, we're going to Garfield. We're not getting attacked today. We didn't know what was going to happen 24 hours later.
Wow.
You know. And when that happened, I was getting ready to have our staff meeting, and a woman came out from in the state headquarters, this emergency operations center, and she told us what had happened. We went to second one, went down, and we could hear New York on the radio. I won't get into what goes on with that, but the thing was, we weren't going to be Rizzy right away, but we knew things had just changed dramatically. And I went home to see my wife. She was all shook up, and at this point, she was doing all right, but she was beginning. So 2001 was a really good year for us. We got to do some traveling and stuff, but she was beginning, her journey was coming to an end in a way. So I took the garbage out, and if you're from New Jersey, I believe, but you know the Northeast, when you're in Connecticut, from 4 at night till 9 at night, you get the chorus over your head. It's all the airliners going to Europe. There's probably 200 of them fly over my house every night. And then I went out, and I'm going, it's so quiet. Then I heard an F-15, and that's when it hit me. It really did. It didn't hit me again until I went to New York to the Breeders' Cup in 2001 at Belmont Park and saw the towers gone and the cops on the roof, and it's still the greatest sporting event I ever went to in my life. It was just, and watching the airliners coming over Belmont, and it was, but we got real busy right away, calling up troops to guard, bridges, nuclear power plants, this and that, and we had the tri-state area. New York took care of New York, but we had the Philadelphia, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey fell under a tri-state thing, and we set up for these operations. Each state would take a turn as a command and control at Fort Monmouth in these old World War II barracks, way off of near the post, so close that you could hear the bugle from Monmouth Park It was wonderful. But
I know where it is.
yeah, so it's a shame they closed Fort Monmouth. It really is. That's where I retired out of. But so we got real busy, obviously, and but after that was when the call-up started, when the war, when OIF started, and conversely, before that, we had a unit, the 143rd Fort Support Battalion, which did a year deployment in Bosnia, Kosovo, and this and that. But they knew they were going. And we spent probably 9 months getting that unit ready to go. A year later, we were getting units ready in 3 weeks. And there's a duty position called a FIRO. He's the Force Readiness Integration Readiness Officer. That's it. And he was from South Africa. We're still good friends. His name is Kim Rollstone, and he's a retired colonel now. And when he come in, I knew when he came through my door that he had gotten a thing from First U.S. Army, from FORSCOM, that he had another warning order, and then we called up the unit, you're being mobilized. My old unit, right after I think they went over in like 2004, they were on their way to Fort Devens for their 2 weeks, and they were told to pull a U-turn, you're going to Iraq. And we just kept calling up units, and 3 or 4 at a time, and we had a great full-time force, and our part-time guys come in, and we would work regularly 70-day shifts. Didn't take days off.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife was getting sicker and sicker. And then, so this just went on and on. The war just went on and on. It was a grind. Also, though, being the first sergeant at the state headquarters, we did have some fun, because my commander came out of the infantry too. His name is Billy Adams, and we decided we're going to take these boys to the field. And they went out. We gave them Chinook rides down to the field, and they went out, and they got lost in the woods, but they learned stuff. And then we said here, and a lot of these people have been at state headquarters their whole career. And I had my first sergeant's meeting, and I looked and I said, any one of you can go to this war. And the majority of them ended up going, oh, we're state, we won't go. No. It was a wake-up call. And every unit we mobilized was done on time, successfully. We had successful mobilizations. The only one that didn't come off well was a bridge company. They went to Fort Lee. The active army treated them terribly, putting them up in condemned barracks. They never went because the bridge they were supposed to replace never got blown up. They came back. The leadership resigned. And Fort Lee got an earful for it, and that went on all over.
I'm sure.
There was a lot of abuse, and there were abuses in Iraq I won't go to with units. If you couldn't fill an infantry battalion, they'd give you a platoon from another state. One of our platoons did that with a state that will go unnamed, and their only casualties that came out of that unit seemed to be the Connecticut troops. So you can draw out of that whatever you want. Anyway, to wrap this career up, when I got there, 2004, 2003, 2004, my wife was getting sicker, and I was coming up on 20 years, and I had planned on retiring, and my mind was made up to try and. She didn't have very long to live, and she'd given up most of her marriage to my career, and being really sick. So March of 2000, we have our National Military Personnel Conference every year. We used to have it in real nice places too, New Orleans, San Diego, Las Vegas, St. Louis. This year was at the Professional Education Center in Little Rock. And I told my boss, I said, I really don't want to do this one. I said, Barb's not doing good. And he goes, I understand. And on that Friday I woke up, she was in respiratory arrest, and she passed. 8 weeks later, my father died. He had lung cancer. And I was in America with no family and a very sick mother who I took care of for 8 years. And
we all do the things we need to do.
Yeah.
It's family.
So that was that. And I retired. I did get remarried, and I got divorced 10 years later. That's just another way and then I moved down here. But 2 years after I'd retired, I was on my way to Saratoga with a retired Master Chief Foreign Officer named Paul Therian, who sadly passed away on the anniversary of my wife's death this year. And me and Paul played a lot of golf, and we went to a lot of horse races together, and we were on our way to Saratoga. And he goes, Thad, who was the adjutant general, who he was tight with, and the others, but he used his name. He goes, they want you to come back. And I'm going, for what? He's going, they got OAF 2 or 3 is starting, and they need help with the mobilizations. You're the subject matter expert. And I stopped buttering me up. I said, what are they offering me? And he's going, and he said, so I looked and I said, all right, I'll do it 2 years as a temp thing, right, or whatever. So I went back and worked to my old offices in civilian. They all loved having me back. But my main thing was, one of them was my original 102nd Infantry Battalion was going for their second trip to Afghanistan, and I made sure they were taken care of right. And then they made the job full time, and then I did that for a while. And then when things calmed down, and I said, you could stay longer, you could get another retirement, GS, and I said, I'm done. I said, you got other people coming off, getting ready to retire, and they can use the money more than I can. I don't need the money, and I'm done. And I keep touch with all my friends, but that's how it ended. It was.
Now, what do you do for recreation, or what's your life like now?
I travel a lot. I like Merritt Island. I'm not a big fan of Florida for a whole, but I love this area, and I take photographs a lot. I'm a published photographer in auto racing. And most of my trips are planned around going to add to my list of racetracks and visiting friends. And down here, I just do a lot of photography, play golf. Mm-hmm. And
if you had the opportunity, was there anything you would have done differently?
Boy, that's a tough question. Militarily wise, I don't know that I would have. There's no single big decisions that I made, and I made a lot of them concerning me, that I regret. Some of the things with other people that I look back, they're just things you had to do, especially disciplinary wise. And I expected discipline. I was a disciplined person, and I had some people who worked for me that I didn't discipline them. I recommended their discipline, and my officers trusted me enough to follow through with that discipline. And those things you look back, but you're going, for the overall good of the organization and the mission, these things had to be done. And those are the tough things that you have to do,
Well, you've had a very interesting and varied career. Is there anything you would change? Anything comes to mind, or?
I don't know if there's anything I'd change with the military.
You said you had gone to school a number of times after you got out of the service. You went back to school?
No. After I got out of the service, I was
prior to.
Yeah, prior to school during the service.
During the service.
We went to a lot of other schools. Okay, so other things like I did was a retirement control board. Okay, so they made a troop. They had a thing called Troopers, TROUPER. So it's a computer program. And Congress went back in the late 90s and said, how much does it cost to send a National Guard unit to annual training? And Guard Bureau going to give them a number. And so they came up with a program that puts all the training personnel on all the tables, and you could punch in a 160-man infantry unit and put in the transportation and where you're going, and it'll give you with the pay, and it'll give it to you. And the program was written by a company called Caliber, which is a wing of Boeing, and they picked me to go down to D.C. to do the RCBs in this, and then go to the schools that they had teaching it in Jefferson City, Missouri, at the Ike Skelton Readiness Center. Places they sent me to Little Rock, Arkansas. So things like that. And then,
excellent.
Yeah, that was that sort of thing. But yeah, after I retired, and it was take care of my mom, and then when she died, and I got remarried, and then that ended a few years later. But we were married for 10 years, and then, and even then, there's a story about that, and it's kind of messed up. Is my late wife's cousin's kids, 3 of them joined the Guard, and they went with my infantry battalion to Afghanistan. One of them was a medic, and he got injured, and at my late wife's mother's funeral, those kids' mothers came up to me She was intoxicated and accused me of being the one who sent her boys to Afghanistan to get hurt. And it was a really wrong time and everything. And we broke up a little while after her mom died. It was the end. They were just, I said, no, this, you don't get it,
Right.
you know.
Is there anything you would want to add, or your friends or folks to know that are going to see this that you to?
Yeah, that as far as my service to this country, which is like my adopted country, is I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the missions we did, especially the Guard, and being a part of the transformation of the Army National Guard to a modern day fighting force that America not live without with a performance war fighting mission. We are as integral as anything else than it good, and America gets this money's worth out of its Guard. I will not comment on what they're doing with the National Guard today.
We'd like to thank you for your time and your service,
You're welcome.
and thank you for coming and doing this for us.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
I appreciate that you guys do it. Thank you very much.